Kia ora, welcome to my channel. I'm Renee. I like to read books and then talk about them on the internet. We're doing it. We're finally doing it. Much anticipated video, I think. I mean, a few people have said that they've been waiting for this, so in my head that means hundreds of you. But no, yes, we're going to be talking about Rachel Cusk today. Some of you may remember that in 2023, yes, I made it my mission to, one of my reading goals, to complete the work of Rachel Cusk. I had a lot to read. I think I had 12 books to finish, and yeah, it didn't quite happen in 2023. I dragged some of it over into 2024. Then she came out with a new book, so I made that excuse that I needed to wait for that, and fast forward several months later, well, now we're here. It's October. This video is probably like almost a year late, but I'm doing it. Finally had the time to sit down, think about everything that I've read, what I want to say, and hopefully put it together in what is going to be a comprehensive guide to her, who she is, what she writes about. Give some recommendations based on who you might be as a reader, and then give my own personal ranking of all of her books, because why not? Okay, first up, who is Rachel Cusk? Rachel Cusk is a female British novelist born in 1967 in Canada originally, but to two British parents. Eventually her family, when she was still quite young, moved back to the UK and established themselves there. She went on to study at Oxford University, English to be exact. She writes mostly literary fiction novels, but she also writes essay collections and memoirs. A lot of her books draw on autobiographical events in her own life, so they feel very much rooted in reality and the everyday. Her earlier works, such as Saving Agnes, which was her first novel that she published in 1993, won the Whitbread First Novel Award. Her book, The Country Life, which she published in 1997, went on to win the Somerset Maugham Award. She's award-winning, okay? She's won awards. She also was nominated as one of 20 Best of Young British Novelists in 2003. Her novel, Arlington Park, went on to win the Orange Prize for Fiction in 2007. She's not an author without controversy, though. Her memoir, A Life's Work, was very critically received by some. That was the memoir about her experience of becoming a mother for the first time. She received a lot of hate and vitriol for that book, which I find interesting. Motherhood is always a bit of a touchy subject, but even more so when you add autobiographical elements to it, I think. She's a mother herself, and she's also twice divorced. Divorce also plays a role in her writing. She writes about it both in fiction and in her memoir, Aftermath. So yeah, she's very much a writer rooted in her own experiences of the world, which I think is a key thing to remember when it comes to Rachel Cusk. Who she is as a person, what kind of biography she brings to her work, is all relevant to who she is. So what does Rachel Cusk write about? Well, like I said, she draws a lot from her own autobiographical experiences of life. She writes about motherhood, being a wife. A lot of her characters focuses around being a part of some kind of family unit. There is always a family dynamic involved in the characters, whether or not they be daughters or wives or mothers or sons. She does write from, in some of her books, such as In the Fold, from a male perspective, but there are always elements of family life. So then you get elements of the domestic and traditional roles and those expectations that those characters are held to. And we see not a lot of maybe pushing against, but definitely questioning of those specific roles around gender, questions around identity, who they are. We get some critique mildly of class in a couple of her books, but nothing that feels overly nuanced or critical coming from someone of her class. She, I think, would be considered, I guess, middle class in the UK, but definitely writes from a very privileged kind of perspective. A lot of her characters are white, and she doesn't tend to deviate much from that, which I guess you can't really blame her for. I wouldn't really expect her to write too much outside of her own experience. It's hard for some writers to do that. And saying that, the things that she does capture well are pretty spot on. She is the type of writer, I feel, that writes from her own experience and uses that act of writing, the art of writing, to really break it down. And she does not hold anything back. She definitely gives up a lot of herself to her work, and there's a lot of admiration I have for the type of person who can just lay it all out there like that in order to write these characters that feel very deep and thoughtful, that are experiencing humanity on a much deeper level. I think in terms of style, her style has changed over the years from what I've noticed. Her earlier novels tend to follow much more of a traditional narrative that we are used to seeing in fiction. You have characters, they are very much based in a specific time. It follows a timeline of events. We're maybe hearing a lot more kind of inner thoughts from them, but it is a very familiar traditional kind of mode of writing that she employs in her earlier work. It's not until we get to the Outline Trilogy that I feel we see a very distinct line in the sand with her style. She's definitely deciding to push that a bit more, and we get that. So we see that in the Outline Trilogy, and also novels like Second Place and Parade, her more recent novels, where it's not following that traditional narrative style. It's much more about conversations that characters are having amongst one another. They're often recalling these events in conversations, so it's less about following a narrative structure or a traditional timeline or a typical way of telling a story, and it becoming much more of a philosophical questioning of that event and what it means to these characters. So we do get the sense that there is a deeper philosophical exploration in her more recent novels. Something that I definitely was blown away by in the Outline Trilogy. That book was one that pushed my understanding of what a fictional novel could be, and how new ideas can be kind of brought to the forefront in stories that traditionally don't feel very exciting. Not a lot is happening. A lot of them are just conversations amongst people, but it's the getting down to the deep kind of questioning that I think makes these books stand out so much. So the most frequently asked question that I get is, where should I start with Rachel Cusk? And it's never just a simple answer, because I don't really know what books you like, or typically what you've read with hers before, or things you like to read about. And so I thought I would give just like a really quick recommendation based on a few things. And I'm just going to give one book for each, and I'm not going to talk about the book. I'm just going to say you should read it. Okay, so if you like a plotty book, I would say read The Country Life. If you love a good sentence, I would say read Saving Agnes. This to me feels like Cusk flexing that Oxford University English master's degree, whatever she got. Very pretentious, lots of really like heavily written sentences. A little bit overwritten in my opinion, but definitely for the person who appreciates good writing. If you are after a book that has a specific type of setting, I would recommend Arlington Park. This opens with a really great description of a looming thunderstorm over the suburb the day before we're about to kind of be introduced to these characters. It really sets the tone for the entire story. It's claustrophobic. It's kind of this dark blanket that lays over this seemingly idyllic suburb, and so you get this looming sense that all is not well, and it kind of colours the entire rest of the story, and beautiful way to kind of set that scene without having it be overly descriptive of like landscape or place. It's a really interesting way to establish setting, I think. If you're really into character and want to read about really strongly developed characters, I would say The Temporary is a good option. It is about a male and a female character. We get a chapter on and chapter off from each of them, and I hated them. And I feel like when you have strong feelings about characters, that's a good sign. That is a sign that the writer has done what they needed to. They've conveyed a sense of who these people are, and we really get some pretty horrible characters in this. And I still think that's fun to read about characters that you don't like. Okay, moving on to like themes. If you're more interested in like reading about specific themes, motherhood, I would recommend A Life's Work. This is her memoir about motherhood, her first-hand experience of it. She got a lot of criticism, a lot of hate for this. I thought it was really funny. I'm obviously not a mother and have not experienced motherhood, but this to me was comedic, genius, really. If you are interested in art, I would read either Second Place or Parade, give or take. I think my favourite of the two is Parade, and I think it specifically talks about art and art making and artists. Probably a lot more in depth than this. You get artists and art making and art in this from one character and this from many characters, so up to you. If you prefer a singular kind of story, then that one. If you want something that's a little bit more multifaceted, then this one. If you want to read about family life, like messy dynamics, then I would recommend In the Fold. It's a story about a man who is kind of less than happy with the version of life that he's found himself in. He remembers this encounter that he has at a family friend's home. That's kind of, he's established his whole idea of what he wants his life to be like around this. And he goes back there and tries to revisit it and maybe remind himself of that feeling, only to be like somewhat disappointed. It's all about the way everyone has shit and nobody's perfect, and the ideas that you have of certain things kind of tend to be rose-coloured when you're younger, and life is less of life has happened to you. Oh, and then this one also falls into art making category, but I think more art of like writing. This is about Cusk's divorce and her kind of mining that life experience in order to create art and what that looks like for her. So yeah, it falls under the category of art, but more the writing side of it. There are obviously plenty of other things that she writes about, but those feel like the main ones, all I'm going to cover for now. Right, now down to the personal ranking. Firstly, I just want to quickly mention 2 books that I read as a part of this project, but I'm not really going to talk about in the ranking because they feel kind of separate. But one is Marble and Metamorphosis, which is a kind of photography book that is accompanied by an essay that she wrote about marble. Very beautiful imagery in this book. Kind of talks about the history of marble on this one island in Greece. And then the other one is her retelling of Medea by Euripides, which follows that Greek myth, which I'd never read before, so it was my first time reading about that story. You can definitely see the influence of this story in her work, both fictional and her memoir writing. And this is actually one of my favorite stories. Like, I loved this book when I read it, so just wanted to give it a bit of a shout out. At number 16, we have The Lucky Ones. Very unfortunate cover. Look at it, it's hideous. It's the only one of these books that didn't get the Rachel Cuskification in the reprint. I don't know why. It really bothers me that I have this book in my collection. I really only picked this up to kind of complete the physical collection of my Rachel Cusk collection, but I really, really hope that they reprint it. I don't think they will, because I don't think this book is very good, but I made the mistake of listening to this on audio. I do not recommend listening to Rachel Cusk's work solely on audio. I think she is a writer that needs to be like read in physical form. Yeah, a lot of this story went over my head. It is about of kind of interconnected, loosely interconnected characters who are all kind of experiencing their own life events, and we see Cusk kind of try to bridge those gaps between people from different walks of life. I don't think she does a very successful job at it. I think this is a clear example of Cusk and her privilege not being able to reach beyond her own kind of experiences, and so the characters that I guess were supposed to be outside of her own felt very almost like caricature versions of what they were supposed to be. Number 14, we have In the Fold. I think I quickly mentioned before, a man who is less than happy with his life and where he thought he would be at this point, goes back to try to revisit a moment that he felt was important, and it's all kind of shattered and the illusion is broken. I think the reason why I didn't find this a success is because it's written from the perspective of a male character. Also, the conversations that the characters have in this are so unrealistic. It just felt very bizarre, the way that these characters were talking to one another. Number 14, Bradshaw Variations. This is about a group of characters who are all related. They're all from the wider Bradshaw family, and we're kind of looking at the ways in which they are dealing with or fighting against the expectations of within their kind of gender, and within those marriages and those relationships, how that affects them. I feel like this is another example of Cusk needing to just maybe focus on fewer characters and not try to do too much widespread, and that this, yeah, felt a bit too kind of chaotic. And if she had have focused on what I thought was going to be just one couple from the blurb, I think it would have maybe paid off a bit better for her. But number 13, Saving Agnes. The only reason this is here is because I felt like it was too overwritten. I also felt like some of it was quite dated. It's the story of a young woman who is kind of early in her career, is about to kind of really, I guess, step into her stride when she starts questioning herself and is probably still trying to figure out who she is. Yeah, a lot of this just felt too dated for me and overwritten. Number 12, Coventry. The only reason this is here is because it's not my favourite of her non-fiction. I think you could read any of her other non-fiction and have a much better time than you would with this. This feels like an amalgamation of everything else she's written about in a memoir and an essay sense, and that, yeah, if you want to read better, just read her other. Only read this if you're like me and want to complete all of her work, or maybe if you want an updated version of the things that she's written about previously. Number 11, The Temporary. This is labelled as a workplace novel, but it feels much more about the miscommunication between men and women, in my opinion, and the ways in which neither of the characters in this book will back down for the other. And we see some of the most kind of vile human behaviour that I've ever experienced in a book in these characters, which makes me really hate them, which I think is a good thing. Number 10, The Last Supper. This is a memoir about Cusk and her family going on like a 3-month trip around Italy. This feels like her most unrelatable to me. There's something about the art history and the act of kind of like uprooting your family like that to do this kind of thing that feels very privileged and kind of like unaware of that fact. Cusk's privilege is the most flaunted in this piece of work, I think. But if you're into art history, you would love this. So, number 9, A Life's Work. This is her memoir about becoming a mother for the first time. I found this deeply comedic. It's about her kind of first-hand traumatic, overwhelming, mania-inducing experience of becoming a mother for the first time, and she uses that to kind of talk about the absurdity of it all and how ridiculous the expectation is on a woman to kind of bounce back and be happy when your body has just been through this really like fucking traumatic thing. Yeah, I thought it was really good. Definitely better suited maybe for mothers, like actual mothers in their experience, if you're looking for something to kind of maybe soothe those concerns or those feelings that you might be having. Give that a go. Number 8, The Country Life. This is about a woman who takes up a post as an au pair for a family in the middle of the country. She's kind of thrust into the middle of their weird, strange, fucked up family dynamic and kind of has to just get on board with it while also kind of dealing with her own issues, skeletons in the closet. Very funny, very plotty, good writing as well. Number 7, Second Place. This is the story of a woman who invites one of her favourite artists to take up a residency at her home and has kind of grand expectations of what that experience will be like, only to be left very disappointed and kind of questioning everything she knows about life and who she is, and there's a lot about the difference between men and women, I feel. Number 6, Aftermath. This is a memoir about Rachel Cusk's divorce, or the aftermath of that. I found this deeply kind of raw and vulnerable, and was very impressed at the way in which she used her experience of divorce to create art, as a way of both understanding what's happened to her and also fueling her kind of creative process and also her living. The idea that those things are up for grabs for others to kind of mine their lives from is, I don't know, I wouldn't do it, but it's always impressive when you witness somebody else kind of do it and do it very well. This is very good. Number 5, Transit. This is the second book in the Outline trilogy. We are introduced to the character of Faye in this one, and we get much more of an experience of who she is like as a mother, also as a writer. A lot of the stories kind of reminded me a bit of The Cost of Living by Deborah Levy. I think it has a much more grounded kind of approach than Outline did. Perhaps because we see the character and much more of her kind of everyday physical setting compared to the first book. Okay, number 4, Arlington Park. Spoken a lot about this book. I really do love this one. It is set in the suburb of Arlington Park, and we are, over the course of a day, introduced to different women who live in this suburb, and we are introduced to their kind of apathetic natures, their stresses, their worries, their concerns. It's all about suburban life and the kind of underlying vulgar, unnatural display that it can be. Very, very good. Okay, down to top 3. It's going to be Outline, number 3. This is the first book in the Outline trilogy. We're introduced to, at this point, an unnamed narrator as she is traveling to Greece to teach this writer's workshop, and through different conversations she has with people, we kind of learn about her and the way that she kind of examines life, or examines these stories she's being told, how she processes them. We're really learning about her through these stories. I think this is on this because of sentimental reasons, or just because I really was taken by Rachel Cusk. This is the first book of hers that I read. It really did kind of like blow my mind that this was fiction, and that these were the kinds of stories that could be written about and the ways that they could be written. So it's got to be in the top 3. Okay, number 2 is Kudos. This is the third book in the Outline trilogy and is actually my favorite. I know a lot of people disagree and think that this was a bit of a disappointment, but I really loved it. I think by the time we get to this book, we see Cusk at her much more kind of honest and humorous. There feels like there's much more personality in this book, and she has things to say through these characters, and she's not afraid to say it. I really like that element of it. It kind of stands apart from the rest because of it, and yeah, it makes me really think that it was a perfect way to end a book about a character who we feel like we don't really know anything about, but we know so intimately through all these kind of bizarre, weird conversations that she has with people. Okay, number 1, you could have guessed it. It's Parade. It may be recency biased. I don't think it is, because I've had like a few months to kind of think about it now, but yeah, I put this as number 1 because it feels like Cusk at her peak for me. Kind of reading everything that I've read, and then this book coming out and reading this, it reminded me of all the reasons why I really do love Cusk and her writing, and it feels super honed and crafted at this point. It reads like short stories about these ambiguous characters, artists named G, who are each kind of dealing with being an artist and what that means. And through these characters, Cusk is exploring all those themes that she loves to so much, like motherhood, like art making, like identity, what it means to be human. This is deeply philosophical, this book, and I think it's the way that I like to kind of ponder those things. Still told through these conversations or these violent acts that are happening to these characters, yet still deeply rooted in what it means to be human and what it means to question those things, just done in such a beautiful way. Her best writing, in my humble opinion. And there we have it, folks. My thoughts, my opinions, my recommendations on Rachel Cusk. Let me know what you think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Have you read any of these? Are you going to? Is she someone you're even interested in now, or have I just completely outlined everything and now you don't feel like you need to read her? Let me know in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Yeah, thank you for watching this. I hope someone finds it useful. Okay.